Trying to think how to respond carefully and cautiously here. I looked at the world the morning after 9/11, and what I saw was 16 acres of ashes in downtown New York City in the island of Manhattan. I saw a Pentagon that had suffered a severe blow. You could, if you looked closely enough on television, see footage of American citizens jumping out of windows on the upper stories of the Trade Center because it was better than being burned to death. And I knew for a fact that if we hadn't been successful, if the passengers on Flight 93 hadn't been successful, they probably would also have taken out either the White House or the Capitol building. It's the worst attack on the homeland in the history of the Republic. We lost more people than we did at Pearl Harbor. We had good reason to believe that there would be follow-on attacks. We'd seen attacks in '93 on the World Trade Center in New York, in '95 on our operations in Riyadh, in '96 on Khobar Towers, in '98 on the East Africa embassies, and in 2000 on the USS Cole. And now along comes 2011, or comes 9/11 in 2001, and there was an accelerating pace to the frequency and to the scope and scale of the attacks. We would have been absolutely, totally irresponsible if we hadn't taken the view that we had to do everything in our power in order to prevent that next attack. And that's exactly what we did. Now you can look back at it, and to some extent our success allows some of our fellow citizens to say, oh, there was nothing to worry about. You guys overemphasized how serious it was. You know, Dick Clark, who was the head of the counterterrorism program in the run-up to 9/11, he obviously missed it. Fact is that we did what we felt we had to do, and if I had it to do all over again, I would do exactly the same thing. I'd be just as tough and aggressive as I could to make certain that those individuals who wished us harm and who were prepared to kill thousands of Americans to achieve a political objective got what they had coming to them. And I think it was the right thing to do, and I don't have much tolerance or patience for those who suggest now the benefit of hindsight 8 years later, and who they've forgotten what in fact happened on 9/11. It was the right thing to do. The threat is still out there. We need to maintain our capabilities, and it's absolutely essential we not forget what happened then or what others are prepared to do with it. Just imagine what would happen if you had 19 men in the middle of two of our major cities, not armed with airline tickets and box cutters, but with a nuclear weapon or a dose of plague or some other deadly biological instrument. And that's the kind of world we live in, and any administration or government that doesn't deal effectively with that threat, I don't think would be doing its job. Well, I arrived in Washington in August of 1968 as a congressional fellow. I was a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin working on a doctorate in political science. I'd completed my coursework, and I came down to spend a year on Capitol Hill. I had a fellowship to do that, and then I'd planned to go back to Wisconsin and write my dissertation and teach, become a professor. When I got here in the fall of 1968, I got hooked up initially with Congressman Bill Steiger from Wisconsin, who I'd already known. I'd worked for the governor of Wisconsin for a year. And then through Bill, met a guy named Don Rumsfeld. And Secretary Rumsfeld at the point was a congressman. He joined the Nixon administration in the spring of 1969 as the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity and as also an assistant to the president. He always had two hats, running an agency, but he also then had office space in the West Wing. I had interviewed with Rumsfeld earlier, trying to get an assignment with him as a congressional fellow, and the interview was a disaster. He threw me out of his office. He thought I was some kind of fuzzy-headed academic, and he was probably right. I thought he was about the most arrogant young man I'd ever met. He was a 30-something congressman from Chicago. A few months later, though, when he was named to run OEO, he asked Bill Steiger, a friend of his, who was on the committee that oversaw OEO, Office of Economic Opportunity, for help in getting ready for his confirmation hearings and so forth. So I sat down one night unsolicited and wrote about a 12-page memo to Rumsfeld, advising him on how to handle himself in his confirmation hearings, what he should do with the agency once he was sworn in and so forth. Gave it to Steiger. Bill liked it and passed it on to Rumsfeld. I didn't hear any more about it. And then a couple of weeks later, he was confirmed by the Senate, and I got a phone call that day from Frank Carlucci. Frank was helping Rumsfeld put together a transition team for OEO. And he invited me to come down and help out, to be part of a group of 40 or 50 academics and policy types that were going to meet the next day at the office at OEO. I went down, Rumsfeld came in, spoke to the group for about a half hour, then left. And then his secretary came in and said, "Is there somebody here named Cheney?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Come with me." Took me into his office, and I walked through the door to his office, and he looked up at me. He said, "You're Congressional Relations. Now get the hell out of here." And that's literally the way he hired me. He didn't say, "I liked your memo," or "I'm sorry I threw you out the last time you interviewed with me." But he'd read the memo. He obviously liked it. Talked to Bill Steiger about me, and at that point I went out and took over Congressional Relations. As the United States enables Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. They have watched the Iranians get the better of us in these negotiations.